Good morning and welcome to Missoula Real Estate Today. This is Denny Bedard. Missoula Real Estate Today is presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate. Diane's been working with buyers and sellers in the Missoula market for over 25 years and shares her insights on the local housing market. Along with her trusted partners, Diane provides complete service for your real estate transaction and brings us guests who provide useful information on industry-related topics and trends. And now, Missoula Real Estate Today on News Talk, KGVO. Hey, good morning. We sure hope you're enjoying your weekend so far, and thank you for joining us on Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck. A regular, an old pro at Missoula Real Estate Today, my good friend Bill Caras Nursery and Landscape, joining us this weekend. Good to see you.
Glad to be here.
Of course, we're friends on Facebook. I saw you out there. You're back on the tennis court, even though you're just playing a ball machine right now, I guess. But you're on the mend from various things like me this year.
Yeah, I got the old Achilles tear, and that's no fun. But I'm back at her.
Yeah, well, you're doing good. You're looking good. How is the store looking and doing? Speaking of which, any services and features you'd like to have people come see right now, or just business as usual?
Well, we're kind of in the last month of planting. Sometimes we can plant into November, but it's a little dicey a lot of years. Some years the ground's even frozen and you can't plant. Trees, shrubs, perennials, those sorts of things, and they have a little better chance of getting through the winter. If you plant too late, sometimes they just don't make it. Beyond that, there's still timely things to do in the garden, and certainly we're having our second bloom season, is what I call it, when we have all the leaves changing color, and
right.
So it's looking really pretty around town, around western Montana, and it's something to enjoy. Sometimes we put so much stock in the spring bloom, but we have some great fall color going on.
Sure, we have had some weird weather patterns the last few weeks. Been unseasonably cool a lot. Has there been any issues that have had impacts on plants and trees for this time of year?
Well, not really. It's pretty normal, and so even though it seems unusual, every year we have some unusual event that happens, but it's cold in the fall. Plants have to start preparing to overwinter, so they start to what we call senesce, and that's why one of the reasons the leaves change color. It's one of the reasons a lot of the flowers die back to the ground, those sorts of things. So there are things to do in the garden, certainly, but you should enjoy watching this transition to our winter. Great color from maples, especially around town this year, but in bushes you got burning bush, and you've got serviceberry and dogwood and all sorts of things showing us some great color. And you should just enjoy it. You're going to want to take a look at your flowers, especially your perennials, and maybe cut those back so that they don't seed all over the garden. But at some point, you're going to want to cut them back because they die back to the ground. But that is not true with the shrubs and trees.
So for fall colors, basically mid-October now, nothing out of kilter there.
Main vine here, our most common vine, let me put it that way, is the Virginia creeper. And it turns a nice bright orange in the fall or bright red. But this year, it got caught off guard by that frost, and so a lot of them got frosted and just turned brown. So we didn't quite get the color out of the Virginia creeper, but most things we're getting really good color out of, and they're looking good. And there are dozens and dozens of things. I just mentioned a few, but there are lots and lots of things that give you a spring bloom and then give you some nice fall color. That's a long season of color for you that way.
Other examples there, what are some things that are most susceptible to early cold spells and/or excessive moisture? Seems like there's been a lot of moisture, too.
Well, I don't think the moisture really is going to hurt us too much unless you have poor drainage. So it's good to have a lot of the trees, especially go into the winter with plenty of water that they've been able to take up to overwinter so they don't dry out and suffer some winter injury. But beyond that, no, I would say for the most part, the unseasonably cold really knocks out a lot of the annual flowers, and that's to be expected. So we get a good bloom a lot of times out of petunias and those sorts of things well into fall. So I think we're on borrowed time a lot of times when we get to October. But those things are going to be dying back to the ground from the frost. Some are more susceptible than others. Marigolds are more susceptible, say, than petunias. Beyond that, when it comes to the vegetable garden, if you didn't harvest all your fruits, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, those sorts of things, they're really susceptible to frost. So you've got to be a little more careful with those. Things like leafy things and root things like carrots or radishes, or leafy things like lettuce and broccoli and that sort of. They actually like the cold, and they'll keep going. So a lot of times people do fall plantings on those, kind of the fruiting type of crops. That's the end for them.
Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate and our guest, Bill Caras of Caras Nursery and Landscape. Let me ask you to continue that thought a little bit, Bill. What do you advise homeowners to start doing this time of year to protect their investments?
Well, I think, you want to just be normal with your trees. Don't put something over them to try and protect them from the frost. It just happens. A lot of times the frost is really good for fruits, for instance, grapes or apples or things like that. It actually sweetens them up. And so it's pretty normal that they can take the frost, and it enhances the flavor. So the main thing is you don't want to freak out too much, but you certainly don't want to fertilize or prune right now, because you can grow. From that standpoint, I would say, don't get over anxious or think your tree isn't going to be able to handle the cold.
Right.
They should be able to handle the cold. They should find this in their genetics to be natural transition for them. But certainly, perennials are pretty awesome. They come back year after year and bloom and bloom and bloom, but they also produce a lot of seeds that can scatter around the garden. And then they die back to the ground, so they look like heck all winter. So, those, for the most part, you need to be cutting those back soon. The one exception is a perennial classification that is very popular, and that's the ornamental grasses. Those die back to the ground as well. So those are the clumping type grasses, and they come with the tall stalks that are tan. Is the most common.
You see that
one.
in a lot of business landscaping, don't you?
Yeah, that's the most
common. I
common
take it they're
one,
pretty low maintenance and.
Well, yeah, they are. They're generally low maintenance.
I love them. I think they're great.
Or feather reed grass, but there are actually dozens of ornamental grasses. Some with blue foliage, some that get a foot tall, some that get 6 feet tall, some that get some red fall color. But all of them die back to the ground, and so at some point you want to cut them back. Some people like to leave them for the winter so they can enjoy the stalks and the leaves over the winter and the frost on them and everything. Yeah. But you want to cut them back early spring then, so that the new growth that's coming up from the ground basically isn't competing with all this dead leaves and dead stalks. You can cut them back in the fall if you wish, and again, that's something people don't think of as far as ornamental grasses being just like a perennial, but that's the situation with those.
I know there are a lot of products you can buy that should help plants and trees through the winter months. Are there any that you are particularly fond of? I'm sure it's case by case. It depends on what you're trying to treat and grow. Any particular products that you think are most effective in our area?
Well, for the most part, I want plants to be on their own, and I want people to plant hardy plants that don't need any extra special help. We do have a number of items that have that are evergreen, but they have broad leaves instead of needles, and then we have a few needled evergreens that are susceptible to winter burn or desiccation. Alberta spruce would be one of them, and say Oregon grape and rhododendron. Those are, some things that are possibly susceptible, and you can spray them with an anti-desiccant. It just kind of coats the leaves and prevents them from losing so much moisture. The other thing you can do for tree trunks is to wrap them with some usually reflective material like white plastic to keep the trunk, especially on the south side, from heating up and then getting super cold. That's how it kind of works here. On a clear day, they can get a lot of sun on the south side of the trunk, but our clear days are our coldest nights. And so if they have a tree that is maybe susceptible to that, and there are a number of them depending on the winter conditions here, they could look at wrapping their trees. I think the other thing is the deer. They browse and they.
You tried to say that with reverence. I know you did.
They browse, which causes one problem. But the other problem is when the bucks are in rubbing their antlers on the trunks in the winter. They can destroy a tree. The living part of the tree is really, for the most part, aside from the leaves, is just that small layer right under, all the way around the trunk, right under the bark. So if they come in and damage the bark, that really can't fix itself. And the rest of the wood that's underneath that is basically structural wood. So if they go all the way around, they're going to have ringed the tree essentially and
Right.
kill it. People should be wrapping their trees or putting a little fencing around it through this time period right now. Then once we get into winter, then it's not an issue anymore. But they, especially those young bucks, are kind of wanting to assert themselves, and they can make a mess of things.
Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate, and our guest, Bill Caras, Caras Nursery and Landscape. Bill, any trends right now? People looking to buy more of this kind of tree or that kind of vegetable? I'm sure customer trends, change as you go along through the business.
Yeah, there are a lot of things going on that I think are exciting. People are learning. People are not maybe as attached to the ground, and they're wanting to be. So we're starting to do more and more seminars on different types of growing, including fruit and vegetable and flower and combination plantings for your pots and that sort of thing. Beyond that, right now, houseplants are just on fire more than any other time in my 43 years being in the business. So houseplants are really in. And then you have all these auxiliaries to the houseplants. You have your succulents, and you have air plants, and you have all these fun little topiaries and that sort of thing. So indoor gardening is pretty big right now. Fruit trees are going like crazy. We have a really good selection that we can grow here in Missoula, including apples, of course, but plums, pears, cherries. With the winters being a little milder, we're doing a lot better with sweet cherries like they have up on the lake. We can grow in Missoula a lot more successfully now. And then probably our biggest seller, or close anymore, is peaches.
Peaches.
And people are having very good luck with peaches, and they're a little more susceptible to freezing, but they are fantastic right off the tree. So more and more people are trying peaches, and so that's a big trend for us. And, of course, we're just always encouraging people to plant trees. It just does so much for our quality of life.
I'll get to that in just a couple of questions here. I have something for you on that. Why is indoor gardening flourishing or booming so much right now? Is it an artistic thing, the perception of cleaner indoor air? Why is that taking off?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just know we've just seen this, and we've just we're scrambling to do other plants. We're starting to propagate some of our own. It's just something that, like I said, is just kind of become in style again.
Yeah.
And houseplants are not as finicky.
It's a trend. It's a thing, and that's what I asked about. Okay, now we had Karen Sippy from Trees for Missoula and Marie Anderson from Missoula Parks and Recreation on the show together recently, and they were talking about what trees they would like to see more of in Missoula with respect to climate, of course. You want to weigh in on that one? What would you like to see more of? They're talking about a lot of open space or areas that have been designated for tree planting that just they aren't there yet.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of new varieties that didn't used to be available. It's not like they're new, but they weren't available, and now they're being discovered and used quite a bit. It's evolved over the time. We're the maple town. This Missoula is the maple town, but in the old days, they planted a whole bunch of sugar maples, and they didn't make it. And there was a reason for that. They are harder to transplant. So that's when they went to the Norway maples, which are all over the university area and all along brooks and everything. And those have served us well, but there are superior varieties of maple. I love sugar maple, and now we've learned how to get those to transplant successfully. Red maple, there's some crosses that have some fantastic fall color. There are a lot of ornamental size maples, and so I think Missoula is still a maple town, and you can certainly find a lot of varieties now that you would call unusual, but there are a bunch of other shade trees that there are very few of in town that we're trying to promote. We're trying to get some established so people can see them and see what their advantages are. But I'll tell you from experience, people come in and they way. But I have a lot of others that I like a lot. We can grow linden here. We are kind of steering away from ash trees because of this emerald ash borer, which hasn't gotten here yet, but is threatening in the Midwest. And so the concern is that it's going to get here. But that's different than mountain ash. We have some new birch varieties that are resistant to that borer that created so much havoc, say in the 70s and 80s. So you can go back to birch. In the flowering trees, we have a bazillion flowering crab apples, but actually there are, half a dozen varieties of hawthorn and ornamental plum and lilac tree and a number of other things. A Sargent cherry cultivar that's gives us a flowering cherry now, that are all fantastic. And so I think diversity for the urban camp. I'm more looking at it from an ornamental standpoint, and I think it's fun to have different varieties and see how they do. And some of them it isn't just for their fall color; it might be for their flower or their fall color, but it also might be for their structure or their corky bark or their stems in the winter. There are lots of fun things you can do in the garden and really take on having some fun with it.
They did have some examples, and one that Marie mentioned, which you did as well. She was a big fan of the linden as well. So must be a pretty tough customer.
Well, they're within all of these categories. So, these are really general terms. But within the category of linden, there are, probably 10 different varieties that grow here. There's little leaf linden and big leaf linden and Mongolian linden, and they all have their own ornamental kind of advantages. The difference with a head shape than a large spreading canopy that you might get out of a maple. And so they're not going to be as broad a shade tree, for instance, but they're a really beautiful tree in the yard.
Yeah.
Fragrant flowers in June. And so our most popular one is called Redmond linden right now. And it puts on these little seeds that it makes it look like it's blooming in June and July.
Hey, Maine just had a pumpkin fest where the winning entry weighed in at 832 pounds. Since Halloween's approaching, can you recall any great pumpkins you've seen in your career?
Well, you used to promote the finding the great pumpkin, but that was 40 years ago.
Yeah, not quite the same thing.
The main thing about pumpkins is it takes them quite a bit of time, but they're very susceptible to the frost. The leaves are certainly anyway, and so they don't like the cold spring. So the best thing to do is start with a plant. You can either start them inside, or you can buy them already as plants and then get them out as early as you can. But they like the heat, so you might have to grow them for a while or protect them if you do put them out early. If it's cold and you stick them out, they just don't do anything. They just sit there. So beyond that, again, there are a lot of different types. And so if you want to grow one of those big ones, you better start it early and protect it, and then protect it late so it has a chance to get to that size. But smaller ones, people are having really good luck with.
Sure, yeah. That was just a fun one I wanted to throw out there at you. Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate. Our guest, Bill Caras of Caras Nursery and Landscape. Let's get back to helping homeowners, Bill. What kind of questions are you being asked, and what kind of advice are you sharing a lot of this time of year? Was it my good panic?
Well, when we got that cold snap a couple of weeks ago, people were really worried. But I actually wasn't. I was really thinking, this is not that abnormal, and trees need to get the message, and shrubs, that it's coming to be fall. And so for them to get a little shock didn't hurt anything, I don't believe. People do wonder what's the best time of year to plant, and fall is a really good time, but most things are in containers anymore, so you can plant spring, summer, or fall, and there isn't a big difference. There's still some of that myth that hangs on that you can only do it, say, in the spring, and that was from the days when they had to dig everything out of the ground. But those are long gone. What can I plant now? Just about any trees, shrubs, or perennials. The selection may not be as great, but it's a really good time to plant those things and have them root in a little bit, so next year they're off to the races and they don't need as much babying as far as water. The one I always like bringing up is fall bulbs, because tulips and those sorts of things, daffodils, hyacinth, grape hyacinth, crocus, all those things are planted in the fall. And in our society now, where we're wanting immediacy, that's one of those delayed gratification things, because you plant them, they're pretty nondescript bulbs when you plant them, but they're beautiful the following spring. But you have to wait your 6 months to get to enjoy that. And it's the time to do it. We don't want to wait too much longer. But through the month of October is a good time to plant all those fall bulbs that bloom it then in the spring and give us all that enjoyment in the spring.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, it is Caras Nursery and Landscape. So let's talk about some of the other services you offer. If somebody contacts you with some ideas they have for their home or business, take us through some of this there, what all's involved and what you folks have to do to kind of get that ball rolling.
Well, we have, of course, the garden center out on 3rd Street where we've been for over 100 years, and we have a really great bunch of people there, enthusiastic and more than willing to help people with questions, ideas, that sort of thing. So that part of the business is there, open 7 days a week, there all the time. You can see all the examples of everything. We're really seriously a bunch of plant nuts out there. And so some of our discussions probably get a little nerdy, but we really enjoy it. Beyond that, we have the landscape service, and in which case, we come in, we can do estimates and design and that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, I would think they would welcome nerdy. It's not just sticking shrubs in the ground. There's that artistic creativity element to it. And how are you with that? Give people a I'm sure.
Well, there are a lot of, little categories, like, if you're buying something, say in a perennial, do you want, a ground cover, something that doesn't get too tall, something that gets quite tall?
Yeah.
Is it sun or shade? All of those things kind of tie into it. Are you looking for a particular flower or color or that sort of thing? And that goes to every category, not just perennials.
Right.
But,
but it's probably a lot of questions like that
there are just a million
customers just didn't really think of when they first started this.
And, you need to go into it eyes wide open. For the most part, I'm hoping that all these plants just provide nothing but delight. But people go out and they just enjoyed their tree blooming, and then they see some aphids on it in the spring, and they're like, oh, my God. And so it isn't all just perfect. But generally, it's really fun to grow things, and a lot of times there are things people worry about, such as aphids or early frost or things like that don't really hurt anything necessarily. So we're really in the business of hopefully cultivating customers to the point where they're having success and they're having delight, and they're enhancing the appearance of their home, and they're enhancing, the view from their home, and all of these sorts of things. There are so many factors to it. And like I said, there is some maintenance, and where you want people to understand that too.
This is Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck of Windermere Real Estate. Our guest, Bill Caras of Caras Nursery and Landscape. And also wanted to say thank you to some of Diane's marketing partners that help bring you the show every week. Rob Fleming with Man Mortgage, Miles Link of Opportunity Bank of Montana, and Carol Blodgett from MakeItMissoula.com. I'm sure that a lot of people who are listening, they know you, and they know that it has been there for a long time, but it really is a fascinating generation to generation success story, and I'm sure you're very proud of that. And just briefly, a little bit of the evolution of Caras Nursery.
I appreciate that. Well, first of all, a lot of times I don't know everybody in town, but sometimes I'm at a counter someplace and they go, "I recognize your voice,"
or seeing you on TV or something. Yeah.
Anyway, we my grandfather got here about 1905 to the U.S. and matriculated, circuitous a little bit ended up in Missoula with the railroad about 1908, and he was quite entrepreneurial. So, right after he was here, he started trying to start different businesses, and it started in fruit because that's what he had done in the old country. He had brokered some fruit as a teenager, and eventually evolved into cut flowers, but then from there into plants and into this nursery that had gone bankrupt out on 3rd Street about 1919. And
so it was an existing location?
It was an existing location.
That I did not know.
From 1896. It was called Missoula Nursery.
Okay.
They went bankrupt. My grandfather had been a customer there, so he went to the bank and bought the business and the land and started operating and grew it quite a large operation.
Yeah.
They did a lot of wholesale growing. Ironically, the Missoula Nursery ended up opening in Butte as the Missoula Nursery. I never quite understood that, but and I have been able to pick up some memorabilia from those really old days. I have a postcard from 1906.
That's awesome.
Of the Missoula Nursery downtown store. So they grew things out on 3rd, and then they had to bring them to town because that was a long ways out back then.
Well, yeah.
It isn't anymore.
No.
But it was a long ways out there back then. And I have some aerial photographs from the 40s. My grandfather had just built up the greenhouses to a tremendous amount. Unfortunately, they were made of wood and glass, and so they eventually got torn down. And so what you see now, my dad and I pretty much built out there.
Yeah. That's great. That is interesting stuff. Well, in the final couple minutes here, I don't want to let you go without talking about this because I might not see you again on the show before Christmas time. But one of the highlights for your customers and for your stores, you do such a wonderful job with this and make it a big event. The Caras Nursery Christmas store, that can't be too far away from opening, right?
Yeah, we have a long tradition in that too.
Yeah.
We have the benefit of being able to put all the garden merchandise away so we can almost start from scratch and build a sort of a winter wonderland. And we've been doing it. Traces its roots clear back to when we first started. But it's obviously quite a different thing now. But we have that luxury, and so we're in the middle of building it. It takes about 5 weeks. It's completely different every year. And traditionally we open right at the first part of November. This year I believe it's the 8th and 9th and 10th or something is our opening. Right. And then we're open 7 days a week all the way through from there, except for Thanksgiving, of course. So here we go again. It's become a Missoula tradition for us and for a lot of people. And so sometimes these things take on a life of their own, and that's certainly one that has. Well,
and of course you got to keep the customers coming back for more, so you've got to come up with different themes every year.
Every year, yeah.
It can't be predictable.
We start from scratch. So,
yeah. Any thoughts on what's going on this year?
Well,
you can't share.
I can share one word: Matterhorn.
Okay.
But beyond that, I think people just going to have to come out and see.
Right, and to do you want to come out and see Caras Nursery and Landscape, your location, hours, and everything like that, so folks can come out and see you.
Okay, well, we're on 3rd Street, but we're past Reserve, so we're on 3rd. I say always on the radio on 3rd, two blocks west of Reserve. It's 2727 South 3rd West, and we're open 7 days a week. In the fall, it's 10 to 5 on Sundays and 9 to 5 Monday through Saturday. At Christmas time, we'll go to 10 o'clock, opening every day, but at least through the rest of the gardening season, it's 9 o'clock in the morning.
People pretty much in the Christmas spirit and that weekend grand opening. You mentioned this year, I guess it's going to be, there's 5 weekends in November this year. I know you like to try to start fairly early in November, but just because of the way the calendar dates fall, I imagine by, the November, we're ready to roll, and Thanksgiving and all of that too.
People are people, so we have some people that are anxious for the opening, and they're there the first go around, and then we have other people that are just totally disgusted with the idea that everybody has their Christmas displays up in October and November. So it doesn't matter to me. I just want people, whenever they get in the spirit and they want to be entertained and have some enjoyment, to come on out, because we're open for basically 2 months with the Christmas store.
Bill Caras of Caras Nursery and Landscape on Missoula Real Estate Today. Great to see you as always.
Good to see you, Denny.
Thank you for listening to Missoula Real Estate Today. We hope you found this morning's information to be helpful. If you have any suggested topics for any future Missoula Real Estate Today programs or any questions about buying or selling, contact Diane Beck with Windermere Real Estate. Email dianebeck@realtor.com or visit her website. We'll see you next time on Missoula Real Estate Today.